HVAC 360, episode number 66, Basis of Design. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of HVAC 360. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. Here, as always, trying to educate you and inform you and hopefully entertain you a little bit about all things HVAC. So this week, we're going to be talking about the basis of design. And typically, most people associate the basis of design with the LEED process. But we're going to take a look at it from a different angle and try to make it part of our standard of care. But before we get on to that subject, I first like to thank our sponsor, the Building Commissioning Association. The Building Commissioning Association, if you don't know, and if you're involved in the commissioning industry, it's really the place to go. It's a one-stop shop. It's where you get all your information. You can get most of the information at their website at bcxa.org. And a wealth of information, whether it's joining the BCA or whether it's attending upcoming events. Some of the upcoming events, their spring webinar series is going on now. They have one more left, and we're going to have to wait until the fall. I know, it's sad. But we're going to have to wait for the fall to get more. But there's still one more shot to get in on this spring series. So right now it's happening on June 19th. And it is going to be commissioning of grounding systems for mission-critical facilities. So that is something that, if you do mission-critical facilities, obviously this is going to be of great interest to you because, the grounding systems, when you talk about electrical, that's one thing that, really is, stands out, and it's a very important part of, what you're doing for those facilities. So that's what's going on in the BCA. If you have any other questions, give me a holler, and I'll try to answer them. Specifically about the BCA, if you wanted to go to the NCBC, the National Conference of Building Commissioning, you kind of missed the boat this year. But obviously, depending on when you're listening to this, there's going to be one coming up in the next spring. So pay attention to the website at bcxa.org and find out when that is. So if you want to network and get involved with the Building Commissioning Association, that's a great place to start. So let's get into the topic at hand, basis of design. Now, like with many things, LEED has kind of tucked in certain documents that they say, everybody's got to do these. They've tucked in the OPR and they've tucked in the basis of design. That's basis of design. I'll say that a little bit slower. They've tucked it into the commissioning credits. Now, what is the basis of design? In reality, frankly, I haven't seen many of these. Some engineers try to pawn off, my documents are the basis of design, and that's not right. That's not quite right. We need to dig a little deeper. So I use the resources available to me, and I thought, hey, you know what? ASHRAE with Guideline 0. Let's go to the ASHRAE wiki and see what that has to say about the basis of design. Unfortunately, it wasn't much help. It just said BOD is the basis of design. That's as much as I got from it, and it referenced 189.1, which is the high performance building standard by ASHRAE. So I went to Guideline 0. I said, okay, well, what does Guideline 0 have to say about basis of design? Because it's like figuring out what it is, what it should be, and try to help you out a little bit. So the basis of design in Guideline 0, it says it's a document that records the concepts, calculations, decisions, and product selections used to meet the owner's project requirements and to satisfy applicable regulatory requirements, standards, and guidelines. This includes both the narrative descriptions and lists of individual items that support the design process. Now, okay, let's chew that up a little bit. Basically, it says that you have basically all your. It's a document that records all your thought processes, but for the design. Before you start getting, pen to paper, you want to be able to describe it a little bit, and it really has to reflect the owner's project requirements. It's kind of like an echo to the owner's project requirements. They say one thing, you say, yes, I understand it, and here's my response to it. So that's really, I guess, the intent as far as Guideline 0 goes. It's your technical response to the owner's project requirements. So it's kind of in that aspect, they kind of go together. Of course, I wasn't done there. I had to go for a different source, get a second source on this. So I went to LEEDUser. If you've never used LEEDUser, if you're involved in the LEED process, personally, I don't get paid or endorsed by these people, but LEEDUser is a great resource, and I'll put it in the show notes. Obviously, LEEDUser.com is a great place to get information about LEED. They have some forums there. They have forums. They have forms that you can use as like templates kind of forms. So they have templates there. If you kind of get stuck, depending on what kind of what variation of LEED that you're going through, it's a great place to be able to get some answers, and it's a reasonable price. If you spend more than a couple hours tearing your hair out over a LEED project, I'd go there first and try to be able to get schooled up on it. So LEEDUser. Great resource. Anyway, their definition, the basis of design, includes design information necessary to accomplish the owner's project requirements. Again, a little bit clearer that, again, it's an echo. Including system descriptions, indoor environmental quality criteria, design assumptions, and references to applicable codes, standards, regulations, and guidelines. Again, you get the codes, standards, and guidelines. Basically, they want to know what you're looking at. So if you're looking at the International Mechanical Code, what year are you referring to? That way, we can all be on the same page that you're referencing the right code. So those are the two definitions. And and again, I think that the clear consensus here is it's your technical response to the owner's project requirements. So those are the two things that you can take a look at. Now, what should it include? Here's when I say that I haven't seen many of these, I don't necessarily force the issue too much to get the BOD. If they want to say their documents are the BOD, I'm like, fine. Unlike the owner's project requirements, which I like to make crystal clear, and I will help owners do that and create that document just because they don't have the technical knowledge to be able to verbalize exactly what their needs are. The basis of design is completely in the design team's court. Really, the engineer should write it, and the way that the way that LEED looks at it is it looks at it from a commissioning standpoint. That's why it's in the commissioning section. But what I mean by that is that if you look at some of what kind of the minimum requirements or what you could get away with, the bare minimum, it's kind of in response directly to the OPR, which should be kind of covering some of the things that are the 3 or 4 different major areas that LEED commissions, which is the HVAC, the domestic hot water, the daylighting and lighting controls, and then any sort of renewables, that whether that be gray water systems or photovoltaic cells, or wind turbines, what have you. Any sort of renewable that you're using in your project. So when they look at it, it's kind of it should directly relate to those specific things. Now, I'm not a big fan of just limiting that because your owner's project requirements, it's a little bit broader than that, and I think your basis design should be broader than that. So realistically, what I like to say is that really every discipline should have their own section. I mean, you might have a cover, but every section should come from, your mechanical department, your electrical department, your, technology, IT department, site, civil, even architecture should have their own piece of this, basis of design. Now, again, it's up to you, and I'll go into it a little bit more. But basically, boiling it down to what it should have, it really should be mostly a narrative. I've seen some good ones that incorporate photos of, generic. If you're going to have a central chilled water plant, you might have a picture of a chiller or a cooling tower, or things like that. Or if you have low flow flush toilets or no flow flush toilets, sorry, that didn't make much sense. If you have like no flow urinals, have pictures of those. And I think that helps. It's not a lot of work, and you can kind of use those generic pictures over and over again. So really, I think the important thing is to make sure, even though I say it's a technical response to the OPR, it should be something that if somebody, and reading it should understand, exactly what you're saying. Don't make it too technical that it's hard to, grasp exactly, what you're responding to. One thing, I guess, is that I'd say, since it is supposed to be a response to the OPR, and this is kind of, reporting 101. When you're asked a question, you should kind of, or if you're, speaking in a large audience and not everybody can hear a question that comes from the audience, whoever's speaking should kind of reiterate, that question and then respond to it. Say if you had a hospital and they've said that patient care is very important, you could write in the BOD saying, patient care is the most important consideration. Therefore, the equipment that we've selected is going to be, we're going to specifically look at the sound data, and it's going to achieve, such and such levels. So that's knowing that, okay, I see that, they've heard us when we've talked about patient care and then how important it is to us, and they're actually responding and addressing things specifically. And I know it's about sound. I don't necessarily know that, if that's the right level or not, but at least they've heard us and are addressing it in some standpoint. I mean, that's really where the commissioning agent goes, okay, well, that may not be low enough, or that's not specific enough. You need to give a different description, or tweak it a little bit. So that's important to put in there to kind of respond to their OPR, their OPR, the owner's project requirements, if I haven't said it before, in the basis of design. Now, obviously, the guidelines and codes are very important, what you're following, what ASHRAE 90.1 you're following, 62, 55, name all the letters. Also, another thing that would be very important is to incorporate, if they have any standards, make sure that you incorporate the standards. Also, put a date on it. Most standards, as far as if you're dealing with larger facilities, they'll have kind of their general standard, what they like to see and such and whatnot, but they'll be dated. So make sure you add that date of the document that you're looking at. So that'll be able to give them an idea of, okay, you're looking at the right one, or hey, maybe we didn't get them the right one or the most updated one, so let's do that now. And before we get too far in the design process. So another thing that it should do is it should evaluate multiple systems. Now, typically, if you evaluate 3, that would be great. And sometimes, you might be dealing with an owner that says, hey, you know what? I don't want you to go through all the trouble of, evaluating 3 systems. If you just want to stick with one, here's the one that I've used, if you're dealing with, like, say, a big box store. They probably don't want you deviating too much from your standard rooftop unit or your air rotation units. So there might be some exceptions to this, but in general, if it's a new building or more, if there's different options that you think, hey, you know what, this might be good, or radiant system might be good, or maybe we go with a chiller plant, or maybe we go with a heat pump system. Let's evaluate those three. So take those three, and then explain why you selected what you did. Now, I guess this is kind of twofold. First of all, it explains exactly what your thought process was and why you selected what you did. But also, if somebody, say, you were to hand this off to another engineer, they could read that and go, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. I was wondering why he didn't do this, and now or she, and now I see that." So that is a kind of a way of getting continuity within the engineering team. So life cycle costing, again, is important. I'll touch on it a little bit later. But if you get life cycle costing to, maybe you say, hey, there's these three systems, and here's the life cycle costing of the three systems, Mr. Owner. Why don't you, I'll narrow it down from 3 to 2, and then you pick the one that you want based on, how you see, the future of your facility going. Maybe you have another discussion based on that. And again, it doesn't have to be a rigid document like the OPR. The OPR is a living document. The BOD can be a living document. So if you have, some simple floor plans, some sketches showing major pieces of equipment, saying, we're going to locate all the equipment in the mechanical penthouse, or we're going to use a basement mechanical room to put all the equipment. It doesn't have to be anything exact, but you might want to have some, general sketches based on what the architect has come up with. Obviously, assumptions for load calculations. You might have a list of, almost like a questionnaire as far as, okay, here's what I assume that the R value is going to be in the walls. Here's what the windows are going to be. And this is important because, again, it may not be necessarily important to the owner, which, again, these are just numbers to him, and he doesn't know and have the technical information or knowledge to be able to evaluate them. But if you give it to, say, the architect and say, hey, read this over and make sure that your details reflect what my assumptions are. So it's a way to kind of get that agreement and that cohesion in the design team. Obviously, you want to be able to make sure, you might want to add the list of systems that you have for your building, and it could just be a simple outline. But you could use this actually as a reminder as far as what schedules to add on the documents later. And here's another thing: get a list of unknowns. It would be important to say, hey, here's what I don't know. Here's what I still don't know. I mean, and it's okay to not know something. And kind of the things that I'm thinking about right off the top of my head is, like IT equipment. That's notoriously, that's usually a late arrival in the design phase, and it really can, cause some havoc in your layout and your system sizing. So, IT equipment, have that out there and say, hey, you know what, everybody, we don't have a great information on the IT equipment. Or sometimes you're going through the evaluation and you don't know what the gas pressure is at the site. Sometimes, and that would depend on, hey, I might have to add a specialty piece of equipment just to account for the low gas pressure or the low building pressure even. If your water pressure wasn't great and you had to add a fire pump or a domestic water booster pump, those are some of the things that, are big cost items. And if you don't know at the time, hey, you know what? Again, let them know, here's what I don't know. Here's if anybody can help me out, feel free. But again, even in the internal to the engineering department, you will know that if you passed on this project, hey, okay, I have to follow up on these couple items to make sure that I don't need additional equipment. Also, it kind of gives the electrical department a little fair warning saying, hey, you know what, there may be additional power load in these spaces. That's some of the things, get all the talking points, whether they're known or not. At least you can kind of have a document that you can follow up on with. So realistically, why the BOD? I think realistically, I've talked about things that describe, and like I said in the beginning, it's a standard of care. It's not just, hey, you know what, LEED says we have to have this document. Okay, let's produce this document. No, it should be a standard of care. It should be getting everybody on the same page. It really, if you get a good one, it really is a differentiator. I've run into scenarios where I've had owners' representatives say, "Hey, you know what? This is really a top-notch team. Why? Because they look at this basis of design. Look at these narratives and the information and descriptions they give with this. Realistically, think about it. I mean, the owners aren't really savvy enough to look at drawings and go, you know what, this SD kind of meets my owner's project requirements. Let's use this BOD in essence, and I guess that's what I'm advocating. Take the BOD and say, you know what, this is going to be my SD drawing set. SDs are kind of, they give you, typically you'd see outline specs, which are kind of, again, useless, at least in my mind. They're throwaway. They're extra time. You may have them already set up, but if they're just boilerplate, why even have them? If you're getting a set of drawings, if you're issuing drawings and they just have little square boxes, why not just a 8.5 by 11 with a narrative sketch with no details, saying box here, or here's the mechanical room, or here's the size that I'm thinking about, or here's the location. Just some general things that help you, start planning. Do some initial planning before you get into the detail of doing drawings. So that's what I'm kind of advocating. Use that BOD to replace the SD phase in the project. So you can use this SD BOD, so to speak, the BOD, and you can really relate to the owner's OPR. Again, it helps out anybody who's not technical to be able to kind of digest, really what you're saying. And if you want to use this to get started in the right direction. I mean, if they read it and they say, you know what, I understand what your system's evaluation, and you recommended going with this system, but I really want to reevaluate this system, and based on your life cycle costing, I think it's pretty close. I'd rather go with this other selection. So it gives, before you put too much down on paper, too much thought, go through that and have those discussions with the owner. Really, I think that even from the standpoint of doing this life cycle costing, what are we talking? In general practice, people use maybe, 5 systems at most in their different designs. I mean, that's typically, if you're looking at heat pumps, you got VAV, you got, maybe central plant, different components, but maybe 5 different systems. You might want to even think about getting a cost estimator involved. I mean, really, this is more than just a single project. Here's a LEED project. We got to do this BOD. You're going to have more down the road. LEED isn't going away. This should be the standard of care. To sit down and have some great thought in the beginning. You can get a cost estimator involved if you're not, savvy, or you don't do any estimating in-house. I know that sometimes we use RS means to do some cost estimating. If anybody doesn't know, RS means is an estimating kind of guideline. So it's a book you can go to and say, okay, how much does this amount of sheet metal go for? Okay, well, here's about the price, and I can, based on what location in the country, you can actually put some labor to it, and some other different factors you can factor in. But RS means is a good kind of basic resource that a lot of engineers that I've worked with use. But not to say that you just couldn't get a cost estimator locally to kind of go through some of these evaluations, what it would cost, and then knowing what the energy is, you could do some life cycle costing for it and put it all together. And again, there's only a couple of variables to this, so depending on what systems, you may not have to necessarily keep going back to the cost estimator. You might be able to get a good thought or a good estimation of what a system's going to cost and be able to kind of tweak it for similar buildings or different things. And so you may not necessarily have to, do all these calculations over and over again for each specific job. You may have a kind of almost an internal decision tree, if you will, of, okay, well, this is the type of project, here's the type of systems we would recommend. And again, this is a great, not only, communication tool internally for why we select what we do and why we pick the systems that we do, but it's a great teaching tool for younger engineers that you bring on board saying, okay, you know what, here's why we select these type of systems, and actually show them the numbers to kind of back that up, saying, here's what we've estimated, here's what the cost estimation comes out at, here's what the energy usage is, and kind of, just present the facts to them and have them learn and go, okay, that's a great understanding, of being able to understand that. And two, you can use it like I mentioned before, when you're doing your load calculations, or you can do it as a questionnaire. You have a list of questions. Here's what I need to know before I start on my drawings. Did I get all the information? Sometimes you may or may not do that. Maybe you have, some sort of, utility sheet that you fill out that you have to make sure that you know all the pressures and things like that, and for the, the gas and the utilities. But this also gives you a chance to say, okay, here's all my insulation factors. Here's what my U values that I'm assuming are going to be. Here's the leakage rate for my building. Just different things like that you write it down and kind of go forward from there. And frankly, and you may think of, you may be listening to me and you may think, this just seems like a lot of work. And, frankly, it's a lot of work. But realistically, a lot of it can become things that you use over and over again. And realistically, as far as a BOD, it's so loose and it's so kind of ambiguous. They really just, get a template that works for you. Just make one up, and start somewhere, anywhere. I obviously, I don't know, you probably have heard of the, and I don't know if I'm necessarily getting this quote wrong, but perfection is the enemy of the good. You don't have, doesn't have to be perfect. It can evolve. You can check it after a while. You can reevaluate it. Just get something started as something that, hey, you know what? Here, I've created something, and if I don't like a section, okay, I can modify it here or I can modify it there, and we can prove it over time. Just start somewhere and get something rolling. Like I said, a lot of the pictures and photos, things that you can use over and over again, different standards that you may, you work internally to your organization. You want to make sure that the BOD matches up with some of those internal rules of thumb or the internal ways of going about things. So let's review again what we have as far as a basis of design, what I would include. Obviously, you want to start with the project information. Pretty generic. Sections by discipline. You want to have narratives in the system. I would include photos. And I would say why the particular system was selected, either based on life cycle, ROI, something, anything, owner's decision that he wanted to use X, Y, or Z. You want to list anything that still is a question mark, and you want to make sure that all your team members, including the owner, know, hey, I don't have good information on this yet, and this is something that I need to kind of complete my what I'm doing. You want to have all your load calc assumptions. And again, compare that to what the architect has, even what the electrical has. Watts per square foot. What's your lighting density? What is it going to be? Include sketches, a system outline, and obviously references as far as what are you using for standards, guidelines, codes, and even owner documents. So that's kind of what, in a nutshell, I do for the BOD. Hopefully this was helpful to you. I really appreciate each and every one of you listening. If you like the episode, please pass it on. If you have any other comments, or if you even have ideas for a basis of design, if you want to share them with the audience, go ahead, send them to me. You can always reach me at matt@buildingx.co. You can also get a hold of me on LinkedIn, and that's Matt Nelson PE. Or you can follow me on Twitter at BuildingX. So if you have any other show suggestions, if you have any other comments, obviously, I post this on my website at the blog at BuildingX. It's buildingx.co, co. And there's a comment section. If you have any ideas, or if you want to just leave a comment there, go ahead and post it there. I'd love to hear any feedback, any kind of opinions, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whatnot. Also, if you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate, not only besides passing it on, you can also leave me a response on iTunes. I'd really appreciate that. That really, it gets the podcast more visible. So that's why I appreciate it. The more comments, the more ratings that I get for a particular for my podcast, the more likely that I am to become noteworthy in the iTunes Music Store. So. Other than that, I would like to also thank the Building Commissioning Association for sponsoring the podcast. I really appreciate it, and gives me a lot of encouragement that people see the value in what I'm doing. So, as always, I think that's it for this week. Remember, know what you build and share what you know.